right, Saagar, what's on your radar?
Well, yesterday, Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz, he swam against the grain. He made a courageous move, swearing off any donations to his campaign from political action committees. I've made it a mission of this show to highlight and to praise Republican politicians, any politician, who are pushing back against corporate interests in Washington. And Gaetz' move could be a new watershed moment in the future battle of the American right. Here's what he had to say.
But being elite comes with a certain responsibility, and our fundamental obligation is to tell the truth. The upcoming election is America's time for choosing capitalism versus socialism. But hear me now. We will not be able to successfully defend crony or corrupt capitalism. Honest capitalism, what we cherish, is under attack every day. Not just by the Bernie bros and Antifa and the radical left, but by special interests and PACs inside the swamp of Washington, D.C. You know, sometimes feels like it doesn't even really matter which political party wins the election, because in Congress, the winner is too often the special interest that shuttles around the most campaign donations.
I'm sure some of the Bernie bros who watch this show won't like that, Dick, but that speech, whatever you think about Matt Gaetz, is the future politics that I'd like to see in America. A right and a left engage in a battle for what is best for average, everyday Americans who have no voice in Washington, D.C., without the gnawing thought that they're really acting on behalf of their special interest donors. This is not the first courageous moment for Gaetz. Earlier this year, he was one of the lone Republicans to stand up and vote for the War Powers Resolution put forth by Democrats after Trump's strike on Qasem Soleimani. That vote cost Gaetz some access to the president and the White House. It was a principled one, nonetheless. And the reason I'm excited by Gaetz' declaration is that he's setting up a new litmus test for the American right. Look at the sheer amount of success that Sanders has been able to have in the Democratic Party just by pointing at Pete Buttigieg and noting exactly how many billionaires have donated to his campaign, or Elizabeth Warren with Michael Bloomberg. Gaetz' new standard gives him a new moral and political authority over any future opponent, and it gives us the ability to look at his voting record devoid of special interest donations. Gaetz, and my hope for his success in the future by doing this, proves that there is another way. If you begin a campaign that speaks to enough people, they will give you their money in the hopes that you will act on behalf of their interests. The old days, where everybody just takes everybody's money, is over, and Republicans across America will now have to answer to one of their own when they try to defend it. It reminds me of one of the great and most potent members of the Republican primary debates.
From an elderly woman.
Let me talk quiet.
How tough
a lot
is
of
it?
times, that's all of his donors and special interests out there.
Too many people on the right defend corporate control over our speech and politics from a matter of principle. When you bring it up to them, they say something along the lines of, yes, I agree that's bad, but because of the principle of freedom of speech, we just have to live with it. Again, I posited a suggestion to them that I posed yesterday in the context of ABC News suspending a journalist for tying their terrible coverage to their ownership by the Walt Disney Corporation. That in today in America, the greatest threat to the freedom of speech may not emanate from the government, but from the corporate control over your life. The people out there who try to defend unlimited corporate influence on American politics from a principled position are really de facto lobbyists for those corporations. And that's why those select corporations fund their campaigns, fund those institutions which espouse those so-called principles to the tune of millions of dollars, giving us the hellish political system that we have today. For those who may defend this type of spending, I would point you in the direction of the candidacy of Michael Bloomberg. You might say, oh well, Mr. Bloomberg, he's not reached #1 in any state. He looked terrible in that debate. Ultimately, it proves you can't just buy something that a great message won't beat. Now, you might be right, but consider all the ways that Michael Bloomberg is skewing the Democratic race. Bloomberg is courting rich people to his committee to re-elect him with the promise that by backing him, they can be on his team, not donate to anybody else, and they don't have to spend a dime. Bloomberg has bought half the political talent throughout the United States, effectively making it harder for any candidate running for office around the country to have access to his political consultants. Bloomberg has spent so much money on TV and digital advertising that he's actually single-handedly pushed up the advertising rates online for everybody. Biggest of all, of course, he could simply amass enough delegates to ensure a brokered convention and thus his choice of a Democratic nominee. All of these are real, tangible harms to the democratic process. They're ones I think that any reasonable person can look at and say it's disgusting. And I'm glad to see a new step forward on the right. I commend Matt Gaetz for his decision. That's something I really wanted to highlight here, Crystal, because it takes a lot of courage on the right. I mean, this is something that it's not only that they just do out of political expediency. They have a whole ideology that they've created around why it's fine.
Right.
And so for Gaetz to come out and say, no, we're done with special interests, because special interests, in that speech that you heard, I mean, he talks about how often it doesn't matter who wins and loses Congress, because the people who get to pass stuff are special interests.
When's
the last time that you've heard that, from out the greatest thing you should fear in this country is bipartisan consensus on anything, especially whenever it comes to taxes and corporate influence. And that's what Gaetz is highlighting. And this is what him and Tucker Carlson, all these new voices on the right, are doing. They're creating a new paradigm of saying, if you take their money, not only are we going to call you out, we're going to set a new standard where somebody doesn't take that money and has the moral authority on the stage, like Trump did with Jeb Bush, to look at them and say, no, those are your special interest, big donors. That's powerful. That's what we see in America today.
And I'm so glad you have to give credit where credit is due, right? From the left, from the right. I mean, that's one of the things we really try to do on this show. And so what we've seen with Sanders, really, Obama first started to pioneer this grassroots funding thing, but he still took all the Wall Street. He was the #1 recipient of Wall Street cash. And you see the way that infected his administration. Sanders was really the first on the left at the national level to say, I'm not doing any of that, and prove that you could do it and you could be successful, and that it caused the people of the United States to trust you more. If you look at all the polling, he's one of the most trusted politicians, not only on the left, but in all of America, because they can see that he lives his values. Gaetz, to the best of my knowledge, is the first one ever on the Republican side to step out and say that we can do this, and that I don't have to take this special interest money, and that this ideological cover for it is BS, and to actually step out in faith that people who support his message will pony up that $10 and $20, and that it will be competitive. It cannot be overemphasized how important this is, because what are we suffering from? I mean, why do people, 70% of Americans, say they're disgusted with the political establishment on both sides? It's exactly because of issues like this, the complete corrupting influence of money, where the people whose phone calls you take are wealthy donors or special interests or big corporations.
In the photo line.
That's who has, and this is not just like a theoretical thing. Political science backs up the fact that those interests have disproportionate impact on the priorities and the votes that are taken in this town, and the average voter has zero influence. And so if you start to see a marker laid down, both on the left and on the right, that impact over time cannot possibly be overstated.
This is really kind of the purest form of what, the GOP might look post-Trump. Because if you look at the Trump campaign and the apparatus himself, if you look at that, even though Trump does spend a lot of time raising money from big donors, if you look at it, the average donation is still like $40. And they have hundreds of millions, they have millions of contributions that come in for personal donations. Like, it's a true grassroots fundraising thing, because it shows that the message actually resonates. Trump's greatest weapon, his threat, was that he connected for the first time to the actual needs and wants of the GOP base. And they gave him small dollar donors and continue to support him all throughout his presidency. So Gaetz, by swearing it off, sets a new moral paradigm to say, no, you don't have to do that. You don't have to, get on the private plane and go to the Koch conference and shake the money tree or whatever in these wine caves. You can actually take, you can actually go out there, make and espouse a position which we know is something that appeals to the majority of the American people, especially when you swear off special interests and you call out the rigged system in Washington, and they will support you. They will give you their money. Look at AOC, freshman member of Congress, who I think outraised everybody else, right? She didn't dial for a single dollar, not $1. She didn't do her DCCC phone call time. Now she's created her own thing because she's an entity in and of herself. That's what I want everybody on the right.
She was a bartender. This wasn't a person with like a bunch of wealth, but people over the country believed in her and her message and her approach to politics, and so they were willing to kick in. And look, it's one thing for a rich guy like Trump. Part of the appeal of him was people felt like he can't be bought because he's already rich, right? And he also explicitly made the case, basically like, like Jeb Bush, Hillary Clinton, I bought all these people.
Which he did. I mean, he
Which
did.
is true.
Yeah,
I mean,
why were they at his? Why was like Trump? One of them were.
Clinton
at
was. They were at his wedding.
Right.
Yeah.
I was like, oh God. And they're all. There's a picture of Bill Clinton, Michael Bloomberg, and Trump all golfing together. I'm like, oh, there.
Remember how he made Mitt Romney do that press conference for?
Yeah.
But
It was
yeah,
beautiful.
I mean, that was a big part of the appeal of him was, and whatever you think, personally, I don't think that this has been borne out in his administration, but there was a sense of he's a rich guy, he gets the nastiness of the system, so he can't be bought. And by Gates, not having that kind of billionaire wealth and stepping out and saying, I'm just going to take this grassroots funding, it really does create a paradigm shift on the right. That's exciting to see.
Commend him for it.
Next up on Rising, Hill's editor-in-chief debriefs us on the latest 2020 news when Rising returns.